Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are streaming this webinar on our Facebook Live page as well. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat box will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. And materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, aka CLIP. Please take a few seconds if you haven't already to create a free account so that you do not miss the bios, slides, and other materials from today's session. And finally, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on June 22nd, we have a double header. First at 12:30 Eastern Time is another Funder to Funder conversation, parent coaching to promote kindergarten readiness, co-sponsored by the Overdeck Family Foundation. Following this session will be Tools of the Mind, Key Steps in Creating a Culture of Learning. On June 29th, we will continue that Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series with a peek into playful learning classrooms, what success looks like. And finally, on July 6th, we will be sharing state strategies for accelerating learning. We will be posting a link in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming learning opportunities. Joining you now is Jeimee EstradaMiller, Senior Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Well, welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining for today's GLR Learning Tuesday webinar, Accelerating Equitable Learning Recovery, District Chiefs as Deciders, planned in collaboration with foundations. My name is Jeimee EstradaMiller. I'm a Senior Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and a researcher and educator at the higher ed level now at the University of Southern California with a focus on K-12 education work. Today's exchange of ideas continues our Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series, which if you have been following us, if you've been joining us, you'll know that we have engaged a series of state policymakers, nonprofits supporting school systems, advocacy organizations, school system leaders to build understanding of the impact of the pandemic and share understanding of what's working, what's helpful in this important time for recovery. We're very excited to come together today to hear from superintendents from across the country. And especially because we're at the precipice today of a turning point, and this turning point is multifaceted. To start, many school districts are moving forward to hybrid learning, or they're moving from a fully online setting to in-person. We know that some school districts have actually been open this entire time. We know that we're talking to superintendents today at a very important time when they're making important decisions about what's ahead in the coming school year. At the heart of many of these decisions, of course, that are very much in the public health realm and the educational realm, are superintendents that have been sitting in the hot seat of navigating local communities, rightfully making decisions at the local level based on the unique context in their particular setting, but not always with significant agreement on issues that are very high stakes about the educational journey for students, but also the circumstances for families in being able to return to work. We know the stakes are high and the information was and is constantly changing. And so I'm very excited to be here and feel very privileged to spend some time with superintendents to understand their thinking, planning, what is ahead for their community. I will make brief introductions and remind everyone that our panelists' full bios are posted in the chat. And we especially want to point you to the slides from my colleague, Elizabeth, that include information about the districts, including their instructional setting, the number of students they serve, their community. So please take a look at that information, including their bios, as well as those district slides that share a little bit more about their communities. I also want to let you know that on top of the phenomenal panel of superintendents we have today, we have several other superintendents on the line who will also be joining us in a town hall style conversation at the tail end of our conversation. So we'll start off with a panel, and then we've invited superintendents from across the country to engage in a conversation about their priorities and what is coming ahead for fall 2021-22. And so with that, I will start off with introductions, but just as a reminder, please do include your questions in the chat as we'll try to pull them throughout the conversation and make sure they're reflected. So we'll start off with Dr. William Hite. He serves as superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, the largest public school system in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. His professional education experience includes serving at every level: teacher, principal, central office administrator, and superintendent. Before joining the School District of Philadelphia in 2012, Dr. Hite was superintendent of Prince George County Public Schools in Maryland, where his central work focused on enhanced access and rigor to ensure college and career readiness. And then we are joined by Superintendent Edward Manuszak, who has served as superintendent of the Dundee Community Schools since August 2016 in Dundee, Michigan. He has been a professional educator for 26 years, holding various positions. Currently, he is collaborating with the Superintendents Association and the Standard for Success to publish the early learning program assessment tool that he designed and created as a member of the AASA early learning cohort. We have Dr. Grant Rivera, who serves as the superintendent of Marietta City Schools in Georgia, becoming the 13th superintendent since 1892. And prior to this position, he held positions as chief of staff, high school principal, high school assistant principal, special education teacher, and coach in the Cobb County School District. Dr. Rivera believes great schools and communities are built on the combined talents of talented educators and an engaged community, and we totally agree, Dr. Rivera. Next, we have Dr. Valerie Truesdale joining us who joined AASA in 2019 as Assistant Executive Director of the Leadership Network, responsible for guiding leadership development services and programs. She served as superintendent in South Carolina's Beaufort County and Oconee County districts before becoming Chief Technology and Transformation Officer for North Carolina's Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. Dr. Truesdale knows AASA's leadership network can be a substantial resource for school leaders trying to keep pace with the rapidly changing delivery of K-12 education in our country. And then lastly, we have Dr. Avis Williams. She is an award-winning superintendent in historic Selma, Alabama. She has served as a principal at all levels, as district curriculum leader, and delivered dozens of professional development sessions nationwide. Dr. Williams is the 2020 Alabama Black School Educator Superintendent of the Year. Congratulations, and 2019 finalist for Alabama Superintendent of the Year. And so we have our superintendent panel with us, but before we have them participate in a conversation, we want to set the stage and connect this conversation to emerging conversations we've been having for the past 14 months around the impact of the pandemic on students across our country. And so we want to provide a little bit of information from that. We've been connecting with educators, we've connected with school advocacy organizations, with leaders nationwide, with policymakers. And I want to raise up, as well as parents, and I want to raise up a few points about the impact of the pandemic from those conversations. And so starting off, we want to talk about, and this is information that our superintendents know extremely well because they are experiencing it directly. We want to start the conversation with talking about the impact of the pandemic on learning. And while the impact of the pandemic is not isolated to learning for students, we know mental health issues, we know that communities have done a lot to really wrap students around and support them and their families and community, and the impact of the pandemic has been widespread. But we want to talk about the important impact of the pandemic on learning. And just a few weeks ago, we convened the national partners that run the major diagnostic assessments for the country, so NWEA, Curriculum Associates, to really explore this question. And you'll see here some information from Curriculum Associates in particular. And this is a trend that is showing up in the majority of the research on the impact of the pandemic nationwide, which is that the hardest hit students are those in the earliest grades, as well as, and this is not included in this slide, but as well as students that are from low-income backgrounds, that are students of color, that are language learners. But we really want to zero in on the impact on the early learning grades. As you can see here in first and second grade, there is a 10 percentage point drop in reading levels than what we would have expected over a multi-year trend before the pandemic. Especially for our district superintendents here and folks that are working in school communities, you know that a 10 percentage point impact is a very significant impact for students. And not only, and moving on to the next slide, Sierra, thank you for managing that. We have the number of students that are also far below grade level. So it's important, we've seen a drop in the students that are at grade level, particularly in the early grades. And then we have higher number of students that are falling far below grade level. So we know that the challenges, although they are not entirely different from before the pandemic, they are exacerbated. Going on to the next slide. The impact of the pandemic has also been felt very acutely by parents. And so just about 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation with parent organizations, advocacy organizations, as well as research organizations that have conducted polls with parents to understand what they have experienced during the pandemic. And we want to share 2 findings from that, but I really do encourage you to go to CLIP to see what the full scope of the conversation, with a lot of very deep and rich information from across the country around parent perspectives in this moment. We want to point to 2 findings. One is from understanding parents' experience and sort of satisfaction with the public school system. And we know that the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequities. So if you look on the left-hand side here, in fall 2019, there were already significant gaps in how parents are experiencing the public school system or all school systems, education for their children, very significant gaps. But you'll see that parents that are in that high income bracket had a small dip and then sort of a quick rebound in terms of satisfaction with education systems. And you'll see that middle income and low income parents had a much larger dip in their experience of public school systems, of all education systems, and with low income families having the largest, and with that gap between the income family levels really persisting through spring of 2021. Going on to the next slide. We also know that parents have had to make a lot of tough decisions about what their children are experiencing on a day-to-day. So whether children are staying at home and participating in learning online, whether they are participating in hybrid programs when they're available, or going to full in-person. And parents have also been choosing learning pods, et cetera. So this graph shows you what the perceptions or sort of the choices that parents are making and preferences in the different schooling systems. You'll see before the pandemic, learning pods were micro schools. Homeschooling was a much smaller trend. But you'll see that for the next academic school year, that there's still a fair number of parents that are undecided, and parents are making decisions. Our superintendents are at the heart of this and facing the many decisions that families, the very personal decisions families are making about what works for them. And then moving on to really talk about, for the next slide, it's not only a set of challenges that our communities have been facing. In fact, we're at a moment of great opportunity where we have a very significant investment in our public schools from our country in terms of educational recovery. So just this last week, states submitted their plans to the Department of Education on how billions of dollars will be spent in education recovery dollars. Some of these funds have already flowed to schools already. And so districts are now facing another investment and making decisions about these additional investments that are coming, but have already been making significant decisions about what education recovery is looking like in their particular community. And so I wanted to start with that context and connect the dots to the GLR Learning Tuesday series on slowing, stopping, and reversing learning loss, because this is an ongoing conversation. And this is a space to share best practices, share information, and really understand what our country has been facing, what our students have been facing. And now I want to invite our superintendent panel to turn on their cameras. All right, I'll give another moment. Thank you, Valerie. Wonderful. So now we're going to turn to our superintendents to understand their school communities and the local context. We want to start off with the two primary issues of the day. What will school look like in the fall in your community, meaning the setting? What are your plans for recovery? So let's start off with your vision for the coming year. Now, what type of instructional setting will families have access to? And with so many families experiencing remote instruction, some are ready to go back, some have already been back, some are ready, some may not actually be willing to go back and are maybe looking for hybrid options to remain. And then, of course, there is a very important issue of vaccinations for teachers and students. That may also be top of mind, and willingness in communities. So tell us about what you're experiencing in your community, your official or maybe your emerging plans for the fall 2021. And so we're going to start off alphabetically. We're going to hear from Dr. Hite from Philadelphia School District, and then hear from our full panel. Go for it, Dr. Hite.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here with my other colleagues from districts around the country. And we've all been experiencing the effects of the impact of the pandemic. But before I jump into that, I want to thank the Center for Grade Level Reading for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I think it's a conversation that's extremely important. So as I've been communicating the vision for the fall, I've been communicating with everyone who will listen. And that is, those are our parents, our stakeholders, our students, my staff members, our district staff, that we plan to have children back 100% on a full-time basis. And we want them in classes and learning 100% of the time, not a hybrid-based model. We do anticipate having a virtual option, but that virtual option will likely be very different than the hybrid model that we employed throughout this school year. We've had a percentage of children back, about 25% of the 130,000 children that we serve here in the School District of Philadelphia have been back in person and just ended. We're going through the final graduations this week that are also in person. And we have done a lot of work partnering with organizations, the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to provide vaccines to all educators. And now we have started with creating the structures to provide vaccines for children that started at ages 16 and up, and now ages 12 to 15. And that effort is actually being led by a group of students who are serving as ambassadors. It's a program called Teen Vax Philadelphia. And it is a group of young people who are communicating with their peers and their families about the importance of not only getting the vaccine, but they are able to respond to whatever concerns or misperceptions that are out there about the vaccines, especially for young children. So the vision is to have schools reopen in the fall. We're working towards that end. We are doing everything to collect information about what concerns parents, what excites and concerns families about sending their children back to school in the fall, so that we hope we could ameliorate some of those concerns as we work to put a plan together to get all children back on a full-time basis come August 31st.
Thank you, Dr. Hite. And next we're hearing from Superintendent Manuszak.
Well, thank you, Jeimee. And I also want to, I guess, emphasize what Dr. Hite had said. Thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for allowing me the chance to be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues. So the state of Michigan, where Dundee is located in southeastern Michigan, we have a comprehensive Michigan blueprint for return to comprehensive learning. And I know that we have, I was on a statewide committee that helped to study for my State Superintendents Association some really good best practices from those around the nation and quite honestly around the world about how do we deal with this issue of unfinished learning. I know that some people call it accelerated learning. Some people refer to it as, learning loss, but we refer to it in our district here as unfinished learning. And so by addressing some of the recommendations made by this statewide effort, and by looking at what we think we can make some really inroads in. I know we have a comprehensive summer learning program that will begin next Monday. In fact, today, and I can celebrate a little bit, proud that today was the last day for our students in our district. We had face-to-face learning since our start of our second semester. So much like, Dr. Hite had mentioned for Philadelphia Public Schools, our small rural community here in Dundee, we're planning on also offering a face-to-face learning option in the fall. And it is our hope to continue some form of virtual option for those that feel not comfortable returning to school, but having the ability to, differentiate and meet the needs of our learners that we have in our district and the families' needs that we have as well. We also plan on continuing to work with our local county health department. We've relied heavily on that relationship and building a community relationship also with local agencies and offering vaccination opportunities. And also we sponsored this spring a testing clinic and for our county here in our district. And we're planning on doing something similar for vaccinations as we return to learning in the fall. And then we've also, I guess the last point that we've made a significant systemic change is we have altered our calendar for the next school year. We are beginning, the state of Michigan had a guideline and a policy on the books that we were required to start school after Labor Day. So we had made a special petition to start before Labor Day. So we will be starting with our students back on August the 30th as well, after running an 8-week summer learning program. So really trying to tackle all this with the data points that we know are best for our students and their families. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Superintendent Manuszak, and congratulations to you and everyone on the call for an unprecedented school year. I know probably last spring may have felt the wildest, but I know this past year has also been a tremendous challenge. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rivera from Marietta City Schools.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be on this call, obviously with my esteemed colleagues and with others. I just have to say, I remember being an aspiring principal in Cobb County, Georgia, and Dr. Hite was an assistant superintendent. So I'm having a pinch me moment in addition to being with all these other incredible people, but I remember looking up to him in our district. So Dr. Hite, it's great to see you again. But I'll speak for Marietta for just a moment, just to give some context. We have just under 9,000 students. We sit just outside of Atlanta, about 30 minutes outside of Atlanta, 12 schools in our school district, 1 high school. We, last year, if I look back for just a moment, we started, much like much of the country, we started virtually 100%. We brought our elementary students back in September, our middle school students back in October, and our high school students back in November for 4 days a week. And we would continue 4 days a week through the end of the school year. We finished the last week in May. To give you some rough ideas of numbers, because I think it's significant to understand those numbers as we look to this coming year, we had roughly 75 to 80% of our elementary students come back this past year for 4 days a week of instruction. We had roughly 60% of our middle school students come back this past year. And we had only roughly 25 to 30% of our high school students. It really, and we all understand this, right? The more independent they became as they got older, the more likely they were to stay home for a variety of reasons. We did this past spring in Marietta offer vaccines. We as a school district partnered with a local pharmacy. We found it to be incredibly effective because as you think about access to vaccines and healthcare, we wanted students and families to come to a place that was familiar and comfortable, as opposed to have to go to a public health office or otherwise. So we've been doing that work here in Marietta and making sure we prioritize our staff, the families of staff, children, our students, and their families as well, really wide open in the Marietta community. It's been very effective for us. One of the things that was also an interesting experience for me this past year, and I think for our school district, is we were one of the first school districts in the country to partner with the CDC to study school-based transmission. So we, during a surge in December and January, studied very carefully about how is COVID transmitted throughout buildings. Give you some quick idea, and many of us know this by now. It was news back in January, but maybe it's not news now. And that was we found that adult-to-adult transmission in buildings was most significant. Second to that was adult to children, especially when adults were in close proximity, didn't wear their mask correctly. Lastly, very, very few were student-to-student transmission. We had zero transmission on school buses. Why? Windows were open, ventilation was going. We had zero transmission in outdoor athletics. We had very high transmission in indoor athletics. I think that's instructive because as we look ahead to next year, COVID's not going away. And whether that's based on people who are vaccinated or not, and the reality is there'll be some element of it in our community, and how we learn to manage that will allow us to have hopefully the most seamless amount of instruction going forward. What does going forward look like in Marietta? We are planning, like my two previous colleagues, to offer 5 days a week of instruction as normal. Right now, we have already done all registration for virtual next year. We asked our elementary families to commit to a 9-week placement, our middle and high school families to commit to a semester placement. Currently, right now, we have 5.5% of our 8,800 students who have chosen virtual. So we have a very, very low percentage. I think one of the reflective points for me is, and I believe philosophically, we should offer virtual to families and students for students who don't feel comfortable coming back, whatever the reason may be. But the reality is we can't allow students, and we shouldn't allow students who have failed this past year virtually to continue to fail next year virtually. So how we meet those families in the middle, when do we say, oh, no, you need to come back? When do we say, no, we're going to let you remain virtual to push in services and support? I think what we can't do as educators is allow students to continue virtually and know that they're allowed to continue to fail. I think the last thing I'll share is around our vision. I can certainly talk about this more later around early learning. The reality is we lost a lot of time. And at least in Marietta, once we got rolling, we had 20% less of face-to-face contact or virtual contact because our schools were open 4 days a week from September to May. I think the question becomes is how do we maximize instructional time? We built these big elaborate summer learning programs. We have plans next year to offer in-person support during every holiday break that we have, but I'll tell you, people are tired. And while we had great ambitions for what summer learning was going to look like, and we've gotten some kids, we're not getting the ones who need it the most. So I think as we look forward, we've got to prioritize not only offering wraparound services and support every day that we possibly can, but we also have to make sure that the instructional time that we have is maximized, because failure to do such will be failure to address the trauma, both academic and social emotional, that we know our kids are experiencing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Rivera, especially highlighting the importance of both honoring the choices families make, but also really engaging with families in conversations on what are the true needs that our students face in terms of what has been the impact of the pandemic. Are they falling behind? And also, what are the true health risks that are there amongst students in the school communities? Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williams from Selma.
Hey, good afternoon. And I do share my colleagues' sentiments and thank you all for having me here. So I am superintendent of Selma City Schools. We call ourselves Team Selma in Selma, Alabama. And we did start the school year out 100% virtual. And we remained that way until the third quarter of our school year. Did a lot of surveying. During that first semester of school, our primary goal was to stay connected with our community. And so we changed our hashtag from Team Selma to hashtag Team Selma Connected, and just did a lot of chat and choose and virtual town hall meetings and surveys and that sort of thing, just so that we could keep our finger on the pulse in terms of what our community needed from us. Selma is a very high poverty community. We're rural, but we also have some very urban challenges with gangs and gun violence and that sort of thing. And so, in addition to knowing that we had families who were suffering because of COVID-19, we also had to address the trauma, and knowing that we had many of our scholars who were living in unsafe environments, and even more so because they could not come to school. And so we had several attempts to bring everybody back, but our numbers just continued to spike. Our return plan is called a return to excellence. Excellence is one of our core values. And so we do look forward to returning to excellence this fall. We did come back for face-to-face instruction during our fourth quarter of the school year. And we had about 70% of our elementary scholars return, and about half of our secondary scholars returned for face-to-face instruction. And for those that did not, they were full virtual. We did not do a hybrid model at all. Now, as we look forward to this fall, we are super excited about welcoming all of our scholars back for 5 days of instruction, full face-to-face. We are also equally excited to offer Saints Virtual Academy, which will be a full virtual school. And what I tell our community and our teachers, staff, and leaders is that this is not your pandemic virtual learning. We're going to have a very robust learning environment and ensure that we provide our teachers the professional learning that they need and all of the resources that they need to have a high quality virtual learning academy. And it's only for grades 6 through 12, and we're keeping the numbers at about 300 for this first year. And just really looking forward to providing choice for our families who may want something different. Because I certainly agree with my colleagues who emphasize the fact that our scholars need to be in school, and we need to have that face-to-face instruction. At the same time, we do recognize that there are some different learning needs for various families and scholars. And so we want to be able to provide that choice as families may deem necessary. We did have testing clinics throughout the entire school year last year, and vaccination clinics. This was made possible for us through partnerships with our local hospital and our rural health management clinic. And that was just a gift for us. They came on our campus and would actually vaccinate our teachers right there on the or test our teachers rather right there on the campus. And for vaccinations, they prioritized our teachers and staff. We are now in the process of partnering with our rural health community partners and making sure that we have clinics for our scholars as well. And this pandemic gave us an opportunity to really take a step back and look at our strategic plan. Our strategic plan is called a Framework for Excellence. And as a result of the pandemic, we are relaunching our strategic plan because our priorities have shifted, our needs have changed. And so we're bringing our transition team back together that formed the strategic plan back in 2017-18, and we're rethinking each of our 4 areas. So with teaching and learning, we're looking at robust learning for our scholars by creating academic learning academies at all of our elementary schools, as well as Saints Virtual Academy. And for area 2, our culture, climate, and community, we're prioritizing safety. We're prioritizing looking at trauma and making sure that every one of our scholars has a trusting adult and an advocate. Because as much as we know they need the teaching and learning, children can't learn if they're afraid, if they're not safe, if they're in trauma, if they're stressed. And we're just making sure that we prioritize that. Within that same area, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but we're making sure we take care of the needs of our teachers and staff as well. Within our leadership area 3, we are continuing a robust Aspiring Leaders Academy so that we're giving our teachers and staff the opportunity for advancement and so that we can have a leadership pipeline. And then finally, within technology and facilities, we actually closed the school. My board voted to close the school at our last board meeting so that we can really examine our geographic footprint and pour those resources into the classrooms rather than maintaining older and aging facilities. But we're super excited to welcome our scholars back to school. They began on August 9th. And we are right now in the midst of our second week of summer learning. And we had about 30% of our scholars who are attending summer learning. And so definitely looking forward to being able to prepare them to be successful for the upcoming school year.
Thank you, Superintendent Williams. I really appreciated that comment of virtual learning is not our pandemic. And that we know that students have different ways of learning, different needs. I also want to underscore what you mentioned about what educators are saying about the mental health needs of students and addressing trauma. That was bottom line, the most spoken about message with our educators, that they feel the need to be front and center, welcoming students back to a exciting, fun, safe learning environment, and that's both physically and emotionally safe. Thank you for that. Kudos to all of you for becoming quick public health officials in your communities and all you're doing on that front. Now, Valerie, we would love to hear from you on what you're seeing on this question across the country.
Thank you, Jeimee, and thank you to my colleagues. I love the title of this webinar today about accelerating equitable learning, the district chiefs as deciders, because it has never been more important as it has been this past year for leaders to be nimble as we are living through the time of unprecedented change and uncertainty. And I want to lift up all educators in our country for the stamina with which they have survived the last 14 months, and they pivoted to new roles and new ways of doing things. What we are seeing as the only constant that has been true across the country has been the variance, that everybody is doing things as they need to. Leadership is always a reflection of the context in which it is made. And what we are seeing in a great example today from our superintendents is that some states were virtual, some states were fully in, some people were hybrid, they were in, back out again. The only thing I can tell you that is a constant this past year has been the need to be nimble and pivot as your community needs and as the numbers changed. What we anticipate for the fall is exactly what you've heard. Some districts will keep remote options for children, and some will be fully in school, but very few superintendents are reporting that they are continuing with a hybrid model, because it has been, to the point of what was mentioned here, exhausting for educators to try to do that. We have been impressed to see that across the country, superintendents and other educational leaders are reframing the discussion about learning loss to acceleration. And I loved what you said, Eddie, about unfinished learning. We use a hashtag, accelerate, not remediate, when we are partnering with the Learning Policy Institute, Linda Darling-Hammond's team. And we're trying to push out the understanding of there is a lot of resources available to help school leaders understand how can we reframe the discussion about kids. And to the point of many researchers have called for educators to look at the next 2 years as recentering and coming back to where the students would have been if we could have projected where they would have been without a pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of folks looking at a virtual option. There are children who have thrived in a remote setting, and an understanding that we need to change our calendars and or settings for some kids, because there have been a lot of marginalized children that the pandemic has heightened the urgency of addressing. As you all have, as our educational leaders, have had to shift from being primarily educators and teachers and leaders to becoming food service magicians, trying to figure out how to feed your community, vaccination sites. As you all have tried, and through it all, still teaching, figuring out how do we meet the needs of children. We used to say that a number of our students have been traumatized through their lives. Their life has happened to them and they've had trauma. Every one of our students has had interrupted learning. Every student, every adult from this pandemic has dealt with trauma. How do we push forward with grace and space and give people the room to respond to the needs? John Dewey told us that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting upon experience. And I've been so proud of the educational leaders in our country. As we reflect upon the pandemic, everyone is saying, what have we learned? How can we go forward into fall 21, go forward to school, not go back to school, to lean in and embrace the learnings that we have had from here? And what I would say to you is that every superintendent that I know has been faced with insurmountable challenges. All educators have, but have risen to the occasion and have been courageous. So I appreciate the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for heightening our awareness, not only of the data, but also the variance of these superintendents, and yet the commonalities too. Thank you, Jeimee.
Absolutely, Valerie, I agree with you on the bravery front and the impact and the need to really center a way forward, a different type of schooling that we can experience with keeping what works and looking forward to new ideas. I was really excited to hear about the significant sort of opening to new ideas discussed today. Actually, Mara Wold on our chat posted a question that's aligned to the next one here. So she's already thinking ahead. Following understanding your plans for your schools, We want to understand your strategy for recovery and then, of course, your associated budget. States just submitted their plans for investment of significant recovery dollars, and you've already been receiving, planning for, and using other American Rescue Plan dollars. These dollars are truly unprecedented and are one-time in nature. And we like to say one-time in nature for now, because we hope that if we tell the stories right about what we're able to do with these dollars, that we convince the public that these levels of investment are really necessary for our schools and worthy. So tell us about your top 3 spending priorities. And we have many superintendents also in our virtual room. So if you could please also include your top 3 spending priorities in the chat so that everyone also benefits from your wisdom. And we're going to start off with Dr. Williams. Please share with us your top 3 spending priorities of recovery dollars.
Okay, so for us, we are looking at this through the lens of our strategic plan. I mentioned that we are relaunching our strategic plan. And so one thing that we were starting pre-pandemic was our academies of academic excellence in all of our elementary schools. So we really want to pour into our people to ensure that our teachers have the professional learning that they need to have a robust learning. And just for example, we have one academy that's entrepreneurship and commerce. One is social justice. We've got STEM and STEAM, and we've got one that has a collaboratory, which is about project-based learning. And so just pouring those funds into our people, making sure that our teachers, leaders, and staff have the professional learning and all of the resources that they need. Because as we look at the unfinished learning and the acceleration that's necessary, we also have to ensure that that our people are prepared to be successful and that we're preparing them to be successful with the professional learning. And one way that we'll do that during the school year is we will have a remote learning day once a month, and we'll use that time for extended professional learning for our teachers and staff, and just really making sure that, again, aligned with our strategic plan, that we are focusing our funds on our people so that they are prepared to be successful. And our scholars are included in that when I say people. So we have what we call Project SAFE, and SAFE is an acronym for Student Advocacy Framework for Equity, and equity is also one of our core values. And within this program, we're really looking at making sure that every scholar has an advocate, that they have a mentor, and that they also have the intervention, supports, and acceleration and enrichment that they need to be successful. We have what we call a 6+2 plan, which is beyond just a 4-year plan. So rather than having a 4-year plan in high school, we started in 7th grade and do 6 years, and then also the additional 2. And so we're pouring resources into that workforce development piece that goes along with that. Our next area would be the programming, and that again is the tools and resources. And so we're making some upgrades, some technology upgrades. You know, we're 1-to-1 now. I mean, we had no choice but to be 1-to-1 after this previous school year. But what does that look like in terms of infusing technology in a meaningful way in every classroom? And so for us, it has meant rethinking technology and rethinking technology infrastructure for our schools. And so we're pouring a great deal of resources into that. And that gets into the facilities piece as well, because we are also looking at ventilation. All of our classrooms have new ventilation systems, and we've got air circulation that's working better. We've got the hand sanitizer pieces, and all of the things that we had around PPE. We are still going to continue ensuring that our facilities are clean and safe, and we're making sure that our maintenance staff are able to do that. During the pandemic, we had to outsource that, but we've since invested money in all of the equipment and the training that's necessary for our own staff members to be able to ensure that our facilities are clean and safe. And we'll continue to stay engaged with our community and make sure that we have a robust communication plan that allows us to hear from our stakeholders. And again, that's part of our strategic planning in terms of using our transition team to connect closely with the community.
Thank you for raising that up, Dr. Williams. We know that family engagement and input in this time has been formally recognized by the law as a fundamental part of this. So thank you for raising that up. Dr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll build upon what Dr. Williams shared. For us, it's really around 3 priorities, our top 3, if you will. Certainly there's a lot of money and a lot of priorities, but one is around looking at student staff ratios and where do we feel we need to push in more support for children. I think the second, as Dr. Williams mentioned, is operations. And the third one is really how do we increase more opportunity for learning for children. I'll walk through each of those briefly. Around decreasing student-staff ratios. In Marietta, we have a social worker to student ratio of 2,000 to 1. I mean, it's like embarrassing. So we have hired more social workers, we've hired more parent liaisons, we have hired more behavior specialists and counselors. And really our goal is to make sure for the short term, for the next 3 years, making sure we're pushing in as many resources as possible. So therefore we can proactively address the needs of children. And I think as Valerie so appropriately said, every child and staff member has experienced trauma and otherwise. So how do we decrease ratios? Because we're not in the same place we were 2 years ago. So we're responding accordingly to that. The second piece is operations. Again, I echo, much like in Selma, priorities around hotspots for students who are virtual to make sure they can connect to learning, devices, Chromebooks in Marietta. We've also had a very extensive throughout the entire pandemic meal delivery program. So how do we continue to do that to make sure our students who choose to do virtual also make sure they're fed? I'll also say though, we have to hold a mirror up and look at the data and figure out what's working and what's not. I can tell you, we spent thousands of dollars over the last year wiping down every surface in a building, when in reality, to Dr. Williams' point, we know we get much more return on investment around ventilation and HVAC than I get on wiping a door handle. So we've got to make sure we follow the science and align the money accordingly. But all those priorities around HVAC and otherwise are still important here. We're going to continue to do those. We're going to do those with the most updated science. I think the third part for us, and we're using our money to fund our virtual school. So whether it's virtual school that we're offering for the 5 to 6% of the students, whether it's summer learning, whether it's remediation, acceleration before and after school during holiday breaks and on weekends, how do we increase contact time and learning time for children? So those are really our 3 priorities: decreasing staff ratios, focusing on the right operational priorities, and ultimately increasing learning time for students.
We're going to add follow the science to our hashtags, Superintendent Rivera and Superintendent Manuszak.
Thank you. No, like my colleagues have mentioned, we have a question that we'd like to answer of what matters most. So what matters most to us? And I think what matters most to us is the foundational piece of any school district, that is the relationship that exists between a teacher and that student, and that relationship that can exist between the school and the family. And for us, we are really blessed with the largest incoming kindergarten class that we've had in our history. I know that we're beginning to see that surge of potentially those families that chose to maybe not send their children last year, and that they're coming this year. So we, in fact, just last night, I had a board meeting and we adopted our fiscal year 22 budget. And we are adding positions. We're adding positions to lower those ratios as well in our specifically early learning and early childhood grades. So we have a comprehensive early learning program here in Dundee. So we have, early Head Start, and then we have a state-run preschool 4-year-old program. And thankfully, our governor in our state and here in the state of Michigan just last week made a reinvestment in that area. So we're actually looking to even increase those slots again, because we are fortunate enough that we have a waiting list in that area. So we're going to try and do that. And unfortunately, our district is looking at, we're at 115% capacity and the large elementary building, that because we're a smaller district. So we're looking to hopefully put more expansion of classrooms into that down the road. But much like my colleagues have mentioned, from aligning to our district strategic plan, improving our air quality. I know that we have received our ESSERS 1 and ESSERS 2 money. ESSERS 3 has still not been distributed from our state to our locals here. So we're still waiting on that. And we're looking to hopefully improve our air quality with that ESSERS 3 money, trying to hit as much of our student population as possible. And then I think the last thing that's important to mention is, after dealing with the last 15 months, some of our technology needs updates, needs repair, needs replacement. So we've reinvested in that category. We also are a one-to-one learning initiative district, and we're very proud of that. And I know that we're just continuing to be in a position where we can give our students and their families the best opportunities as possible. As Grant has mentioned, making sure that you have the accessibility. If those families, and on an equitable basis, you want to make sure that that is an identified limitation and barrier for families where we are, Our district is 73 square miles. And just this last year, we split our route. So now we have a dual route that happens with our transportation services. And because of that, some of our infrastructure with our transportation department. So we're looking to replace some of that with our district as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Absolutely. And Superintendent Hite.
Thank you. Like many of my colleagues, there are three primary areas that we are focused on, and focused on those areas from a viewpoint of having 4 summers and 3 years to actually learn from whatever investments we make right now. And those investments are in the 3 categories that many of my colleagues have talked about: the interrupted learning or accelerating learning. And in that category, it's everything from a robust summer program to additional supports in schools that perhaps extend the day with high quality before and after care at many of our schools that not only engage children in other activities, but it expands that time that they're engaged in learning activities. In addition, training and developing individuals around very good tier 1 instructional strategies and really thinking through what does that mean as an organization and as a system, looking at our curriculum and ensuring that we have the tools and resources in place in order to do those things. And so many of those categories are in that first category of interrupted learning, accelerated learning. Second one is really around social and emotional and being responsive to the social and emotional needs of our young people and the trauma that all of our young people have been engaged in. And as was mentioned earlier, also understanding that our educators are also experiencing a level of trauma that that may reemerge once they're all back with children and seeing other families and seeing other staff members. And so understanding that this year, we actually put a behavioral health counselor into every school, albeit virtually. We're going to continue with those supports. We've also been impacted, as Dr. Williams has stated, down in Selma. We've been impacted here in the city of Philadelphia with a significant amount of violence, and some of that violence has impacted our young people and their families, and really focusing on those schools that have been hit hardest with incidents of gun violence and other violent acts. And so ensuring that we have rapid response teams that can go in and help staffs and help community members and help children and help the children of the schools that are feeding into those schools as well. And then the third category is really around our facilities, and it is capital and infrastructure. And here in Philadelphia, I'm sure, unlike in Cobb County and Marietta, here in Philadelphia, the average age of our buildings are 70 years old. We have 225 buildings. The average age of the buildings and systems are 70 years old. And unfortunately, many have been neglected and in disrepair. And so really focusing our work on accelerating the work that we're doing around facilities, infrastructure, capital improvements, and really thinking about that. But I think the thing that's most important that I want to stress once again is that we are also taking this opportunity to look at the things that may be different as we move forward to get some idea of what works and what doesn't. And really also looking at this as an opportunity to analyze results from those things that may be new that we put into place. And when you consider the fact that many of us were propelled forward about anywhere from 2 to 5 years with respect to now how we engage with technology and how children engage with technology, how educators engage with technology, and really thinking about, okay, why did that work well for some and not for others, and making sure that there is enough variability there so that we're able to be responsive to our learners. And so that's our approach here in Philadelphia, and very consistent with many of my colleagues, what many of my colleagues have described.
Thank you for that. Superintendent Hite, parents are behind you. One of the findings from the poll that we didn't discuss before was there's a very strong, vast majority of parents in national polls that are saying they are for rethinking what is happening within schools. And we know that educators have also had to learn a variety of new skill sets in using technology. As a teacher who left the classroom in 2015, I was in a full one-on-one environment in 2015. But when students left the building, they had paperwork going home because we assumed they wouldn't have it at home. That is now not a given, right? That is not an assumption we're making that it has to be that way. What do we do to change the circumstances moving forward? Really appreciate that. And the other trend I really want to underscore is your investment in your people and that relationship between educator and student. And so that moves us into our next question. We heard from our panel of educators, and this is also supported by the RAND American Education Panel, the national poll of educators, and of course, education support, education organizations just a couple of weeks ago. And they mentioned that a lot has changed, right? Setting, how to think about student engagement, the use of tech tools, and then some things have just stayed the same. The importance of relationship, leading, the learning, the need for rigorous instruction and curriculum. We also heard from educators that curriculum that allows students to see themselves within the curriculum from an identity perspective, that we really need to push the envelope on moving there. And then the need to know students in differentiated learning, those things are staying the same. But we also know that many educators are leaving the profession and that this has been a rough year. And so this question is directed to Superintendent Williams. Tell us about how you were thinking about your teacher workforce. Are you experiencing a shortage? How are you supporting your educators to really step into the classroom this upcoming year?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. And so I think I've shared a couple of our core values. Joy is also one of our core values. And this is probably the longest I've ever gone without smiling or showing some joy. I'm trying to keep my game face on for everybody, but joy is one of our core values. And we like to show our teachers and staff that we value them. And one way we do that is, again, in investing in them. When I mentioned about people in terms of us investing in people, we're also making sure we provide math coaches, and someone else mentioned social workers and interventionists, so that teachers don't have to do it all. It's overwhelming, and especially when you consider the unfinished learning piece. And we want to make sure that teachers have the additional human resources in terms of support. But one big thing that we're doing is prioritizing self-care. You mentioned that many teachers feel the stress, and Dr. Hite mentioned this as well. Secondary traumatic stress is real. And so all of our schools have self-care rooms. And this was something that we actually started pre-pandemic. And so we have completely transformed the old teacher's lounge into a self-care room. And so you have lounge recliners, and some of them have the massages on them. And, we've got adult coloring books, and just a space where teachers can go to relax. And again, just to have some time for mindfulness. And we emphasize that. I send an email out every morning called Morning Joy, or Mojo for short. And every Wednesday is Wellness Wednesday, and send wellness tips. And so we really changed how that looked by making sure that we had a wellness team at each school, so that every school also had someone that was prioritizing the wellness and the self-care of our teachers and staff. And then we also invested in an employee assistance program that we did not have before. And so in the event that our teachers and staff need some additional support, they have access to counseling and other resources as part of that EAP. And then, we've got some opportunities for them to earn additional money through stipends. And because, when we look at surveys, we know that it's not just about the money, but it's sometimes about the money. And so when we give our teachers opportunities to earn additional funding, I do think that that's a help as well. And I mentioned our Aspiring Leaders program, and just prioritizing the inclusiveness of making sure that we're building an internal pipeline where our teachers, again, feel valued and know that they are a part of Team Selma, and making sure that we're addressing it from a district culture standpoint, and that our principals and other leaders within the district have that same concept. Our theme is one team, one voice, committed to excellence. And we use that theme to make sure that we lift our teachers up so that they feel valued.
Thank you for that. One of the campaign's big bets is in investing in educator excellence on the National Board Certified Teacher, that has been seen as a strategy to really invest some of the dollars in professional development across the country. And I know, Valerie, are you with us? I was going to go to you next, but if not, I'm going to move on to the next question.
I'm here.
There you go. Hi there.
I also mentioned, I wanted to mention that we're relaxing the dress code for teachers. I made
Jeans
a
at school? Jeans
relaxed dress code. We're going to call it snappy casual. And, my HR director wore jeans the other day. And during our cabinet meeting, I said, you wore jeans and nobody died. And so we're really looking at a relaxed dress code. Our teachers are professionals. And, with the movement that they do and the way they engage with our scholars, it's okay for them to come to school with jeans on without having to pay money and without it having to be Friday.
Snappy casual, Valerie, what do you think? Are you seeing that across the country?
I think it's amazing. Thank you, Avis, for that wonderful idea. I think one of the things that we've learned in this last year is that what you wear isn't really about the teaching and learning. And it's been fascinating to see the superintendents pivot to affirm that the adults have had a really tough year and to have more self-care, to give their teams grace, as I mentioned, and space, because everybody is dealing with trauma. Very few people don't know someone who died or had COVID and has been very, very sick. So caring for folks has been a big piece of it. AASA seated a national commission not long ago to emphasize the reason for all of us joining together to learn and grow from this pandemic. And one of the categories that I know we're really excited to hear from both Ed.D. Manuszak and others is the importance of early learning. That's one of the key categories. Another one that was mentioned by our superintendents is the need to look at our technology infrastructure and to use this time to catapult us forward into an age wherein our students have the access. We've got some strong energy going right now in the country about the need for ubiquitous broadband, and seeing all of those kinds of things come together. I think this is an important time. I heard one superintendent say last week on a call, this is our moment. This is a time when we can advance equitable learning for children because the conditions have shown us if we don't, we are going to lose whole groups of children. So thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for pushing this discussion forward and bringing the research forward.
On that topic of early learning, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Manuszak first and then Superintendent Rivera to talk about their specific efforts, because the trends here are pretty significant, as well as children in the preschool time seeing lower enrollments on that front, even lower enrollments in the kindergarten level. So we know that has an effect for school readiness. So please tell us about your great work, Superintendent Manuszak.
No, thank you. And I first and foremost just can't emphasize this enough, that enough of my colleagues around the nation, and this is not a knock against superintendents. I happen to have a very specialized background in early childhood education. I was an early childhood education major. I taught kindergarten, I taught preschool when I was teaching. I was an elementary building principal for many, many years. And so there's a little bit of knowledge there that I can apply that a lot of my colleagues around the nation don't have that type of background. So, one of the efforts that I'm leading with the help of the AASA early learning cohort is we have a project that we had launched that's now being sponsored, as you had mentioned earlier in the call, an early learning program assessment tool. And this tool allows a leader in a district to, it creates an accessible, ready template for a leader in a district to take that long view vision. So like someone like Dr. Hite, who has 275 buildings, of which, a percentage of those are elementary buildings that have early childhood programming in them, where you could actually monitor and have this self-assessment done on your own programs that you have. It has 4 age categories. It runs from birth through age 8. And it allows at a quick glance, any leader to say, where are we lacking? So I applied that tool to my county consortium, and we identified very quickly as a county, we were lacking in programming for birth through age 3, our families. And our state has an early on special education identification program, but we weren't connecting with those families. And we need to redefine, we need to look at our elementary building principals, the ones that we're leading, because those leaders also in recent studies have shown they're lacking confidence in early childhood education. So we need to have a training strategy in place to help them so that they can help lead those teachers and their families. And one very quick, simple takeaway that anyone on this call can take: your elementary principals need to stop referring to your buildings as K5, K6 buildings. It's a P5, P6, and my district, we're a P20 district. And when I say P, I mean prenatal. And what I mean by that is those families of those unborn children that are in your school district, you have a responsibility. We have a call and a responsibility as leaders to work with those families to make sure that they are feeling welcomed and included and invested in what we're attempting to do. You can have the best district strategic plan in the world, but if you can't execute aspects of that, then it's not as good of an effort. So you really need to have that applicability of that project. Another very exciting project I'm part of that I'm leading is we're developing for our colleagues an early childhood superintendent's toolkit. And this toolkit has agencies from around the nation. 14 national agencies are coming together so that at our national conference in February of 2022, when we're finally all able to be together, so Grant and Bill and Avis will all be able to see each other face to face. I'm so looking forward to that time. And we want to give that really good guide and that really good guidebook to say, what are those best practices that are going to come from First Book or come from the NEYC, the National Association for Education of Young Children. And so what I've been able to do as a superintendent is infuse all of those resources. And we have a poster that we had developed when we had our on-site visit with our early learning cohort back in 2019 before the pandemic, of the 5 keys to success that we have for our early learning program and that we've used and that we implement. And so we're really, really proud of the work that we've done as a district in that area. So a couple of things that I see as aspiring trends is you need to make connections with families before they officially enter your building. The state of Michigan still does not require students to have kindergarten. There's a bill in our House and Senate floor right now that will require children to have kindergarten. And so we're hoping that we can work closely with our locally elected officials to get that through. But you really need to cultivate that relationship. It's about building that positive relationship. A child's zip code should not determine the quality of their education that they receive. And we need to do better. That's a call for everyone on this call, and it's a call to my colleagues that are on the call too, that we need to challenge ourselves and identify those weaknesses of things that we know that we need to work on as a district, and how can we apply those. So developing those, cultivating those relationships early, making sure, much like successful districts have done, Boston Public Schools, a continuity of a plan that goes from the time that you have in unifying and having vertical and horizontally aligned curriculum, and making sure you're doing those things to bring your staff together. So when they transition from your Head Start or preschool program, know your Head Start director, know your people that are in those classrooms, and then have them work with your existing staff to transition those children and what their families' needs are. Don't lose that momentum that was built. Build upon it and build upon it with success. And making sure too, when you have that curriculum, making sure that you provide time for your staff to work together, to make sure that they are doing the things that are aligning and making differences for those differentiated learning instruction patterns that you have. So really, there's a multifaceted approach to this. And it's really, really important that we as leaders continue to strive to make sure that we do the best things we can that we know are going to help our students and their families in an equitable manner.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Manuszak. I'm going to go to Dr. Rivera quickly here, and then we're going to turn to, which was already mentioned before, the importance of the relationship with families, which is something that is very much underscored as sort of the parents, caregivers, grown-ups as being the center in early learning in a very big way. Superintendent Rivera.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Just to echo, I think, what my colleague said in Michigan. In Marietta, we are pursuing a birth through age 8 continuum. And I think this idea that P means prenatal. And I'll tell you, as we think about supporting early learners, I'll give you this one quick thought. My concern as we go forward is we've got to make sure we are following the pedagogy about what is best for children. And I'll give you one example in Marietta. For a very long time, we have worked on reading with children in pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, third, acknowledging that third grade is pivotal for a child who transitions from learning to read to reading to learn. And one of the things we focused on here in Marietta is truly following the science of reading, because the reality is that many of us are doing what we've always done. And in a time like now with lost instructional time and learning loss trauma, we've got to make sure we align tightly to the pedagogy. We're partnering with the Atlanta Speech School to make sure that all of our pre-K and K-3 educators are trained in the science of reading, to make sure when these children walk back in the buildings that we're following the pedagogy, we're following the science, and that we're not deferring to old practices, because to do that would be significant as we try to support our children.
Another topic that's very near and dear to the heart of the campaign is the science of reading, and one that is political in a lot of places, unfortunately, but is fundamentally just grounded in the science of how children read, and for us to take advantage of that as educators. And I want to transition to another topic that the campaign absolutely believes is essential to closing opportunity gaps, and especially the fight against poverty. And to reiterate, the campaign's mission is to disrupt generational poverty by ensuring that first step in the success sequence ladder out of poverty, high school graduation, at a bare minimum, but we know that it takes so much to get to that point with our students. The campaign is focused on the role of authentic family engagement and the important parent-teacher partnership in support of student learning, and with parents holding a fair amount of learning space in much bigger ways than before. We know that this is crucial. And we want to hear directly from Dr. Hite on this question. Philadelphia School District was just recognized by the Institute of Educational Leadership as being a true example of engaging family in a very important way. Dr. Hite, if you can share about the work in Philadelphia.
Thanks, we'll be glad to. And then, so start by reaffirming the belief that students whose families are engaged in their education are more likely to develop well socially and emotionally, but they're also more likely to graduate on time. And we acknowledge and recognize that. And so there was a great deal of pride in our district hosting the Institute of Educational Leadership, and particularly their annual conference, albeit virtually this year because of the pandemic. But we have what we call here, as most other districts do as well, we have an office that is geared towards family and community engagement. We call them FACE here. So it's their FACE office, and they've been very impactful even before the pandemic, but especially during these last 15 months. And so additionally, a board has implemented a policy requiring all schools to have what we call school advisory councils, and with the majority of members being parents and community members. And so those individuals then help inform like the budgets that schools come up with. And then we feel here in Philadelphia, at least, that the best mechanism for communicating are all of the flyers that go home every day from all of our schools. Not one message that comes from a district office, but really the communication that goes home with each child on a daily basis. And there's a great deal of synergy with their Board of Education, who just adopted a set of goals and what they call guardrails, which are the conditions in order to make sure those goals are met. And then in their goals, they also have a very significant family component. So the Office of Family and Community Engagement, which is our office, our FACE office, there's regular communication with families, with neighbors, with community members, and it's stressing the desire for them to be more active in schools. And they do that by recruiting those individuals onto a district-wide family action group, developing a district-wide family engagement policy, and then making sure that those things are happening at every single school. And then additionally, I think one of our colleagues earlier talked about surveys and asking for information. The one thing that we're constantly asking families, and particularly the families of the young people we serve, and we ask the students this as well, is what's the best mechanism for communication? And what's the best way for them to receive the information so that we're using those mechanisms to get the critically important information to those individuals. So in some areas of the city, it may be email. In other areas of the city, maybe a text message. In other areas of the city, it may be something that goes home with children. In some areas, it may be all of the above. But we have found that our ability to engage with individuals on a regular basis with the information that they have requested in the manner in which they have requested the information has been the thing that has helped us to provide communication to those individuals more regularly. And we think that the communication has, quite frankly, become more helpful.
Absolutely, and trust and communication is essential. I actually want to invite all of the superintendents. I'm going to change up the program a little bit to make sure that we hear from everyone, but please stay on camera. The panel we have now, I'm going to ask the other superintendents to join us. Thank you, Valerie. And I believe we have 3 more superintendents. And so the question that I'm going to pose to you all and moving into question and answer, which we've been collecting, is thank you, Margaret Marotta. So let me introduce you from Haverhill Public Schools, Massachusetts. And we have David Moore from Indian River County Schools in Florida. And I believe also Superintendent Vivian Ekchian from Glendale Unified, California, formerly with Los Angeles Unified. And so I want to start with putting the question out there, but Margaret, David, and Vivian would love to hear from you first, and then the entire panel. As you approach the new year, what do you identify as the most compelling reason for optimism or concern? And within that, we're hoping to glean your priorities for the year. And so, David, you're off mute, so I might go to you first if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us here in the state of Florida, we've been open pretty consistently throughout the school year. I opened up with about 54% of our students in school. We were able to grow that to about 80% come the winter break, and then ultimately close our school year about 86% of our students in place. And for us, it was always about maximizing the time that we did have, ensuring that the quality of instruction was really looking at the defined deficiency of children, and then maximizing the space and time that we had with those students. So we're a public school system, but really made the decision not to act like one. So we looked at a traditional school day and said, we have to do everything we can possibly do within that school day to modify how we use that time to ensure we don't experience this great decline in terms of the students' ability to read. And that's what we did. It was relationships with our teacher unions. It was an all hands on deck approach, really to ensure at the end of the day, we didn't experience a drastic slide. Just had our 3rd grade state scores come back. And for every district that I spoke to, you're seeing great declines as a result of the impact of COVID. But here in the school district of Indian River County, we maintained right where we were just for 3rd grade prior to the pandemic. And I don't want to ever celebrate maintaining, but in the midst of a pandemic and in comparison to other counties, it looks like we made a great decision. Moving forward, it's more of the same. We've tripled the number of students that are in summer services without expending one additional state dollar. So leveraging partnerships throughout our county, really to come to a deep understanding as to what the concern would be. So we have 3 times as many kids in our early grades, K through 5, in a summer school experience. And then we're maximizing as we begin to roll out. We'll be 100% traditional learning. We have a virtual option available. We have learned so much on how to do that effectively. So we're looking forward to doing that significantly better. But we're fortunate to have our environments completely open. Most of our parents have really built a trusting relationship with us. Big priority for us is communicating. I probably have done 86 Facebook Lives over the course of the pandemic. And that was just to really build trust in terms of how you manage through a pandemic, and you figure it out together as a community. And that really allowed us to ensure that as we begin to plan for next school year, we just continue to build upon that success.
I see a couple of people have unmuted. Please feel free to jump in.
Okay, I can jump in.
Go ahead, I'll wait.
Okay, great, thank you. I would say for us, the celebration is that our kids are back in school and they're attending. We've been back since mid-May with about 90% of our kids in school full-time, about 10% still in some kind of remote learning. The kids are attending. I think, so they came back mid-April. So we've been back about 8 weeks. About 3 or 4 weeks in, we noticed that the honeymoon was over, and I think that's our concern. We have escalated student behaviors. Our kids have maybe forgot how to socialize in some ways in groups, and not having the beginning of the year, that typical 4 to 6 weeks to reset and set expectations for the classrooms, has left us in a difficult place. So I think that's our cause for concern this year, is just our kids' mental health, and where they're at. And to combat that, we've really increased our summer programming, our partnerships, and to make our summer program more attractive to our kids, we've switched to a model where we have academics in the morning, and then we bus the kids out to a YMCA camp in the afternoon for those that would like, for like a traditional swimming, camping summer program. I mean, we're a small urban environment, and that's been really attractive to some of the families. So that's been positive for us.
Thank you, Margaret. Now, Vivian.
So we brought our students back the fourth quarter of the school year, and today is a celebration for California because we have finally lifted some of the restrictions that the city and the county and the state, every individual is super excited about. I think what we really learned is it was an opportunity for innovation and ability to take risks without the worry of making mistakes. And we learned that the use of time is really important in our instructional day at all levels. We also jumped at the opportunity, because also we don't have full day kindergarten in our district, to build a bridge program so that coming 5 days a week, August 18th, we will have a bridge kindergarten program. It may be facilitated by personnel that aren't necessarily the same that teach in the morning, as we're still in negotiations with our labor partners about that. But the reality is that we can offer differentiated support has become really evident. And we've revised completely our perception of mental health support through telehealth and through a variety of other strategies. Every student can receive mental health support, and it's not necessary that they are pulled out of the classroom or that they have to come after school. So we're using staff differently, we're using our time differently, we're prioritizing our resources, and as all my colleagues said, early literacy is front and center on everyone's mind, literacy and numeracy being the drivers of success. And of course, a behind the curtain look on equity issues that concurrently have plagued our country. And in our school district, it gave us a chance to really begin these difficult conversations and coming back to a new normal that is different what we had and better than what we had before.
On that point, Vivian, I want to bring a question, actually 3 questions of the ones that are in the chat are about sort of the new normal looking forward. So one is about ensuring how to tackle the digital equity divide on an ongoing basis. So broadband was discussed somewhat. The second one is thinking about virtual learning as a new endeavor that is not just in response to the pandemic, but is a new potential reality that stays in a big way. And then another is for students who are struggling but are virtual, how do we actually convince them? So Dr. Rivera talked about this, about what they truly need. So all in all, it's really digital equity and virtual learning, a new frontier. Would love to hear any emerging thoughts or reflections from this group around those topics, and what are some emerging solutions in your community?
I will say for us in Selma, it's about working with our legislators around the broadband support. We are fortunate in Selma to have fairly good connectivity, and with the additional funding, we're able to provide our scholars and families with the hotspots if they don't have it. But there are a lot of rural communities that even with the hotspot, they don't have the broadband connectivity. And so I think as superintendents, we have to have strong relationships with our legislators and really begin to look at internet connectivity as a utility, and making the move to do that, and working with our local elected officials as well, and just making sure that in collaboration with them, we're able to serve our most vulnerable communities, and especially those that are extremely rural.
I'll build upon Dr. Williams, and as she talked about equity and access, let's talk about virtual school for a moment. I think we have to really wrestle with, I know the learning experience is different for a kindergartner than it is for a senior. If I'm trying to teach a child to read in kindergarten, that dynamic is very different than what a student might be as a senior learning calculus. And we've tried to identify profiles of families and profiles of students that we believe are successful. Like, this is what it takes to be successful, and asking families to hold that up as a mirror. But I have grave concerns because I wrestle personally with what I believe should be a choice during a pandemic and in response to a virus and where we are. And at the same exact time, I've got grave concerns about what virtual learning means for a child K-3 learning to read. It's just different than you might have for a more independent learner at an upper grade. And I think we don't have a lot of margin for error with our youngest learners.
Any responses to that or more conversation on that front? It's definitely the topic of the day, and we'll invite you all back for a conversation to hear your thoughts and emerging practices as we continue.
I think parents as partners, and the reality is that through Zoom or other virtual ways, by providing devices to our families, we've been able to increase parent engagement. And knowing that at the youngest level, it's so important to have parents engaged in the extended activities beyond the school day is really another silver lining to this experience.
And if I want to just chime in to say, I know that Dr. Truesdale had mentioned that the National Commission that was released in April from the AASA, this comprehensive report and really kind of resource is one that really does show for us as leaders in this area, what can we do to make differences in the lives of our families, and how do we go about doing that in this kind of post-pandemic world, and what creates that new normal. And I know that, if you look at the comprehensiveness of that report, focusing in on the whole child as the learner and making sure that we're addressing that need. And we often ask the question, are children ready for kindergarten, right? That's the question. And I have to give a shout out to a colleague of mine who's on the AASA learning cohort. When she coined this, she said, is your kindergarten ready for your students? Is it ready? And I think that gets back to Grant's comment. We know and we rely on our colleagues, people that are, what we consider to be our experts, our teachers, and we listen, and we can listen to them. And when we're listening to our families, we're offering what we think can be a best solution, because we really do want that connectivity to be there so that we can connect with our families on a deep, meaningful way.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And there are many questions both in the chat and in the Q&A box that I know we won't be able to get to. I do want to let you all know that there might be a poll popping up on your screens. Please provide us with feedback about this session, although I am sure our audience agrees that we want this panel back to hear more and definitely want more time. But to wrap up in the next 3 minutes, I would love to hear from you all in 5 words, if we can make it happen, because we've got a lot of superintendents, a lot of brain power, a lot of hope and courage in this group. Give us 5 words on what is your source of optimism for this next year.
I'll start and here from Philadelphia, and I was thinking about the technology equity that you talked about earlier, or the equity and connectivity, and we were able, to 5 words or less, best way we get through this is together. And has been together as a city, as organization, as partners, that we've all come to solve the problems that were all in front of us. So I think the best way that we have something better moving forward is together.
Absolutely.
I agree. And to piggyback on that, just connecting with the community in a deep, meaningful way. And in Selma, that means looking at restorative practices and social justice, and just making sure that we're all wrapping our arms around our scholars so that we can provide them with the best opportunities possible.
Yeah, and for me, it would be just the opportunity to re-envision what public education is. We have an opportunity where we were forced as public education to rethink how we educate our children. So we can't miss that opportunity to build on that momentum to really be more specific and creative on how we meet the needs of all kids.
I'll offer, I think sometimes people may have taken schools for granted, how much they meant to a child and arguably how much the adults meant to children. And I think my hope going forward is to really assert our schools and our school community, the smiles that we will see once again, the eyes that we will see light up once again, I think gives me incredible hope for how we help our communities heal and move forward, because everyone realized how important and critical schools were during this entire pandemic, and that will not change going forward.
I would like to share that it's inclusiveness and that we respect all expressions of human talent and potential, because we've seen it through the pandemic come through, and that we value the unique perspectives, qualities, and contributions of every person in our community.
And I would add reimagine, support, encourage, and I guess last, make sure that we are offering our best effort moving forward and knowing that we have great resources within our own districts and within our own communities.
Thank you all for this time. This has been a phenomenal conversation. We're hoping to continue it. Please join us in July for a similar conversation, similar questions, but with state chiefs and the Education Commission for the states. But I am so privileged, so honored to have facilitated this conversation. I hope you all have summer plans, self-care summer plans, so that you are able to recharge, because we need superintendents and leaders like you in this fight. Thank you for this work. Thank you for all you do. And here is a list of our upcoming webinars. Please find this recording on Clip, as well as the resources from this time. But thank you so much. Take care, everyone.